everybody, welcome. Gettysburg 160. I can't believe it, it seems like it was just Gettysburg 125. That was my first anniversary. I wonder when your first battle anniversary was for any of the battles of the Civil War, the Revolution that you actually remember. And every year we come to Gettysburg, since 153 and 154 when we started doing video series, we try to do something a little different. And this year, you may have already heard, we're trying to focus on eyewitness to Gettysburg, to the campaign, to the battle, and bring in the soldier and civilian accounts of those who were there. And I'm just going to open up with one. We're standing, by the way, west of Gettysburg, near what's called the first shot marker. We'll talk about that more in a second. But this idea of the soldiers marching through town, the soldiers being Buford's cavalrymen, and they're marching through on June 30th. They're coming through the town of Gettysburg, and one of our more prolific writers, this is Tilly Pierce, writes about actually standing. She tells us where, which is really cool because you can go back there at the corner of Washington and High Streets in Gettysburg as Buford's soldiers rode by. She talked about how they felt safe. Finally, here's the Union Army. Remember, a few days before this, the Confederate Army had marched through and to an extent ransomed the town of Gettysburg. So the town was on edge, but now here come the Bluecoats marching through town. The girls, she was with a group of girls at the corner of Washington and High, and I think it was the Union Forever. They started singing it, but they didn't know all the words. They only knew the chorus. So over and over again, they sort of just, sang the chorus of the song. And I don't know, just by saying where it is, when it happened, it allows us to see it a little bit better. And we hope that you agree that this eyewitness approach might be something pretty cool. We hope you'll share this with your friends and follow us on YouTube and check us out at battlefields.org. Now, somebody who has a lot of these things committed to memory, and I'm a little worried he's going to go a little overboard because he's got so much banging around in his head, is Tim Smith, the Tim Smith of the East, Adams County Historical Society, the official historian for Adams County, who loves talking about local stuff, civilian stuff, soldier stuff. Get on out here, Tim.
So at the Adams County Historical Society, we do have a large amount of civilian accounts and also soldiers' accounts as they relate to the civilian experience. And that's kind of our specialty. But, June 30th, 1863 was an interesting day for both the soldiers that fought in the battle and, of course, the civilians. The civilians had been in a very tense situation since June 15th. When the Southern Army invaded Pennsylvania. And of course, on June 26, John B. Gordon's brigade passed through the town on its way to the capture of York and eventually the Wrightsville Bridge. But on June 30th, Union cavalrymen under John Buford arrived about noon, and they ended up camping in the fields north and west of the town. And the townspeople were so excited to see them that they turned out on the sidewalk and, as Gary mentioned, sang patriotic songs, handed out jugs of milk and water and occasionally even beer to the soldiers as they came through. And they thanked the soldiers. And when you read the accounts by Buford's cavalrymen after written years later, this was a very special moment for them because they had been in Virginia and, they're used to riding through a town and, people cussing at them and throwing things at them and mistreating them. And they had passed through Maryland on our way here and then crossed over the South Mountain Range. But really, this was the first time when they came into a town of northern civilians who are cheering them as they pass by. And the impact that this event made on the soldiers is mentioned in all their witness accounts. Of course, in our accounts, we have accounts by the civilians who are just so happy to see them arrive. And then that night, Buford's men camped in the fields north and west of the town. And think about this, there's about 3,000 of them. That is probably more people than these civilians have ever seen in one place in their entire life. Gordon's brigade passed through, but this would be more than Gordon's brigade. The other parts of Hurley's division passed north of the town on June 26. So it's a fascinating atmosphere in the town. And that night, the townspeople come out and feed the soldiers and, talk to the soldiers, and there's all kinds of civilian accounts. On the morning of July 1st, near the town, a lot of the civilians, especially the boys in town, actually go out to Seminary Ridge and they're standing around, expecting to see some of the battle. Very reminiscent of the civilians outside of Washington, D.C. that attempted to watch the Battle of First Bull Run. Of course, as soon as the heavy fighting got started, the civilians ran back into town to find the shelter of their homes. But here at the Ephraim Whistler House on the evening of June 30th and the morning of July 1st was the vedette post of the 8th Illinois Cavalry along the Chambersburg Pike. And it was Lieutenant Marcellus Jones who was in charge of the vedette post for the 8th Illinois. And it was his job to ride between the various vedette posts and check out the situation. And he was called to the vedette post here early in the morning. He got over here. One of the men at the vedette post pointed down the road to a cloud of smoke. The Southerners were approaching on the Chambersburg Pike. He watched them for a while. He borrowed a carbine from Sergeant Safer, leaned it across a rail fence, and fired what is traditionally known as the first shot of the battle at 7:30 a.m. We have a really nice civilian account from our 1886 history that mentions that the Confederates dropped an artillery piece in the road in front of Samuel Lohr's house. And apparently, according to one of the Fredericksburg artillerymen, Samuel Lohr runs out of the house and yells at them not to fire the cannon in front of his house. But they start lobbing shells at the vedette post, and the vedette post scatters. Ephraim Whistler, 31-year-old blacksmith, lived in this house with his wife and children. He comes running out of the house, and according to the only known account of it, an artillery shell lands in the road in front of him. He's thrown to the ground, he's brought into the house, and eventually he dies of shock. Now this is about a month after the battle. He actually dies and is buried in a nearby cemetery. But no matter how you cut it, he's one of the first casualties of the battle, and he is a civilian. We have other civilian accounts in this area as the soldiers are formed in line of battle and march up and over this ridge towards the town. After the heavy fighting on July 1st, a massive amount of wounded soldiers are brought into this area and occupy the farms around us. And of course, for the next few days, this area was occupied by the Southern Army.
And it's interesting too, and I think, Tim, stay on here for a second, and we're going to give Chris White a chance in a sec here, but this occupation resulted in separating some families. You have some kids going out to watch the battle, you've got parents going after those kids, you've got, men being separated, women going home, and some of the men being taken prisoner. Is that correct?
Yes. And as the Southern Army advances towards the town, there's this huge line of separation between people on that side of the line of battle and people on this side. As the Southern Army passes over Seminary Ridge and in the area of Lee's headquarters, there was a lady that had given birth on June 30th, Mary Jane Arndt Thompson, the daughter-in-law of Mary Thompson, and her parents lived just out here along what is now Belmont Road, a short distance from this house, and she ended up fleeing through the Confederate lines with her infant to find shelter at her father's house.
Now, we are fortunate that, there's not too many battles that this many people wrote about. Bull Run or Manassas is one of them. It was the first. Everybody wrote about it. Gettysburg being this massive event, a lot of people wrote about it. We still have a tiny percentage of everybody's accounts of all the soldiers and civilians who experienced it, but it's just about more than anywhere else. Maybe Bull Run, Appomattox, and here. Everybody wrote about those three things that seem like in great proliferation. We're going to hear a lot of those stories, and a lot of those that do consider civilians is what the Adams County Historical Society does. As Tim mentioned, there's a new museum there. Beyond the Battle is great. I'm not saying it because Tim's here. Their Caught in the Crossfire experience is one of the best indoor Civil War experiences, history experiences I've ever had. So I highly recommend that. I'll also say that, Tim mentioned about a kid being born. Tim does a program on battle babies. If this is interesting to you, all of the kids born in the wake of the battle that have a connection to the battle, and some of them named like Meade and Flora and Chantilly and things like that as a result of who fought here. Check that out on Addressing Gettysburg, if I'm correct. I think that was a Farnsworth House program that he did, actually. Now, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're doing Eyewitness to Gettysburg for Gettysburg 160. We're out at the Whistler House with the first shot marker. Anything to add, Tim, before I bring Chris on?
Well, I just think it's interesting that when you read the civilian accounts or the eyewitness accounts of the battle, in this area, we maybe have 2 or 3 eyewitness accounts from men that were in Archer's Tennessee Brigade that passed over here. But we have dozens of civilian accounts of the first day's action. We might have, in some areas, we're going to have more civilian accounts than we actually have of soldiers in the fighting. One of the accounts from Archer's Brigade actually mentions, as they're passing through this area, a dog attacks the regiment. A dog comes out of a house, and the soldiers shoot and kill the dog. So the first fatality of the battle is a local Adams County dog.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories to bring up, is that this is a neighborhood that these folks are marching through. So just to give you an idea of where we are, we're on the west side of Gettysburg. We're about 3 miles outside of the diamond, the square, the circle, whatever you want to call it, in downtown. And we're along a ridge line that runs roughly north to south. So I want you to think of this as one of our first speed bumps if we're the Confederates. We're going to come up here, hit Whistler's Ridge. Then we're going to hit Hare's Ridge. Then we have McPherson's Ridge. Then we have Seminary Ridge. And then finally we get into the town. So as you're marching forward, this is, for the Confederates, going to slow you down. And that's one of the things that the Confederates talk about, is having to deploy out here to deal with John Buford's horsemen, who really aren't on horseback, who can then just go to the next ridge line and to the next and to the next. So that's how we start to see the battle start to take shape out here. And one of the privates in the, I think it's the 7th Tennessee, a Private Moon, he is going to come up here, and he's one of the few ones that, as Tim pointed out, in Archer's Tennessee Brigade to give us some accounts. And he goes all the way up to Willoughby Run and is going to talk about the various items that are in front of him. He'll engage with the Iron Brigade. He'll talk about being down inside of Willoughby Run, but he would have marched right over top of this piece of ground. Now, on June 26th, the Confederate Army came through here. And I think it's important to remember, just down the road off to my left would have been the first Battle of Gettysburg, if you want to call it that, between the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Militia as well as Robert Bell's company of Adams County Cav. And then we'll have Gordon's brigade come in here, and essentially they're swept away. But the Confederates will come marching down this road in the form of John Gordon's 6th Georgia regiments. And as they go down into town, they'll also have the 35th Virginia Battalion of Cavalry out front, known as the Whites Comanches, named after Elijah Veers White, who is their leader. And as they go into town, this is the first taste that the people of Gettysburg have of the Confederates coming into town. And what do they hear them say to them? They see these men come wildly into the streets, probably like a Wild West show, scaring people on horseback. And then Gordon's brigade comes into town. And one of my favorite stories is that they're going to tell all the civilians, if you think we're bad, wait till you get the Louisiana Tigers coming through here. Wait to see what they do. And it turns out that they actually treat the town pretty well, even whenever they're here again in July 1st and 2nd. There's a lot of accounts that we'll probably talk about on the south end of the town that involve some of those men of Jubal Early's division. Lee's battle man will go into town, ransom the town, and then move on out towards York and places beyond. But the Confederates would have come through here on June 26th. They come through here again on July 1st, and they don't exactly know where they're going. Now, as they come through the various courthouses, they will try to grab as many maps as they can. This entire campaign was not mapped out before they came up here. Now, Lee, in 1862, in February and March, will tell Jedediah Hotchkiss, who is Stonewall Jackson's map maker, to put together a map that will spread out into this area, but we don't have a very accurate map for really either army. So as they come through here, they're going to have to grab civilians. There's a civilian doctor who comes through here, and I think he's one of the men who talk about that dog being shot out here, and he is scooped up by the Confederates, supposedly as Southern secession values, and he is going to help lead the Archer's Brigade as well as Joe Davis's Mississippi Brigade forward as they head off towards that first day's field. So as they get closer to town, we'll also gain more evidence that the Confederates are coming in the form of those writings with diaries and letters. Because remember, we're on the outskirts of town here, but as we keep getting closer and closer, the Confederates will start to engage with more people, not just Yankees. And I think that's something that we need to remember. There are 2,400-ish civilians in this area, and many of them give us the idea of what it was like, not only from July 1st through 3rd, but what happened on June 26th, June 30th, and then of course beyond, even whenever President Lincoln comes here in November of '63.
Well, here we are. We got semis on one side, a train coming in behind us. That's the railroad cut train, so to speak. And I think this is a good setup. We're lucky to have these accounts. We know we will hear from you as to whether or not you like us using these accounts, referencing so many people a little bit more than usual. Tim, anything to add?
Oh, we wanted to just mention that, of course, this area is greatly altered. At the time of the battle, it was an unfinished railroad, and there's a train coming through the railroad cut now. Actually, and if we were to walk over there, Gary, this is a very, very deep part of the railroad cut in this ridge, and what's been referred to as Whistler's Ridge because of the Whistler House. But it's a pretty deep cut there, much deeper than the railroad cut near the town. And I just wanted to mention that this area was much more open at the time of the Civil War. This was farmland out beyond Marsh Creek and all the way to the town, and this area has really grown up. There's a nice photograph of veterans at the 1913 reunion at the 8th Illinois Cavalry Memorial, and you're looking in that direction and you can see how open the land is out in front of us.
All right, well, one burning question. We're seeing it in the comments. You know, I just hope you'll settle this for us, okay? Willoughby or Willoughby's Run, and why? Hit it, Tim.
Well, I just love the apostrophe S. His name was Willoughby Winchester, one of our early settlers, and the stream, that feeds out of this. Let's see, it feeds into Marsh Creek. This is Marsh Creek, and Willoughby's Run's up here. And it should be Willoughby's Run and not Willoughby Run.
You say that because it's his first name. That's what you're
I say that because all the early maps of the battlefield have the apostrophe S, and lazy map makers have dropped the apostrophe S.
Well, I think there you have it, folks. Well done, Tim. I'm happy to help with this particular thing. Willoughby's Run it is. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Chris. Thank you all for watching. Please share this with your friends. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Like us on Facebook. And make sure you go to battlefields.org to get inspired. Thanks for everything you do for battlefield preservation and, of course, education.